Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben.
This is Diego Sanchez, Randy Couture,
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio UFC 248 preview show. Dennis Skurativ here with Kasper Zalowski ahead of a very, very fun fight card, UFC 248 at T-Mobile Arena in Vegas this weekend. Cass, we have a hell of a preview show for all the people out there at home listening today.
That's right, man. Sexy guests all around. Brett Okamoto, straight out of ESPN and into your hearts. Going to be breaking down a whole bunch of things. Obviously, UFC 248, but some of the fun rumors flying around. Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje, UFC Perth here in Australia on June 7th. There's quite a few things to talk about. Also, a little bit inside of UFC 248, but outside, Darren Till versus Cannonier. What exactly happened there, and how could those guys fit into the possible future middleweight title picture? Also, Dan Hardy, one of, if not the best analysts in the game, joining us to give a juicy, sexy, in-depth preview of UFC 248, specifically the main event, Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. Oh my God, what a tantalizing matchup. I can't wait for it. Also, we'll be talking about Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jedrzejczyk. And shit, just for shits and giggles, just for fun, let's talk about Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje as a potential hypothetical matchup. So, yeah, sexy show. Sexy pre-recorded show, right, Dennis?
Yeah, that's right. Fortunately and unfortunately, you had the wedding last weekend. I'm going over. Well, I've been over to the wedding in New Zealand this coming weekend, so I had to pre-record the show a little bit. But I'm super excited to bring this preview to the people, Cass. It's going to be really exciting to hear some of the breakdowns from these guys on the show today. And just a quick reminder, with UFC 251 around the corner, June 7th over there in Perth, why not grab some Submission Radio gear and represent? We've got your Straight Outta Melbourne t-shirts that are available right now. You've got some great sort of classic t-shirts as well. Jump on. Don't forget that. You know, a lot of great t-shirts there as well. So, and just a reminder, if you do get some Submission Radio merchandise, make sure to tag us on your social media. We'll love to see you guys wearing your gear, and we do retweet and sort of mention and do all that kind of stuff on our social media as well when we see it. So jump on, check it out. There's a lot of great stuff to be had, Cass.
Yeah, that's right. If you're listening to this show right now, Dennis is in New Zealand and I am dead? No, probably not. Probably not. But you know what? You can prove that. Drop some comments in the comment section below because we love interacting with you guys. Give us your fight picks and predictions for UFC 248. And you'll know we're still around because we'll be responding to them as we always do. So, yeah, thanks for the love last week, guys. Thanks for the love for the Jorge Masvidal interview. Social media open to you guys as always. DMs have been flying through at Submission Radio on Twitter, on Instagram. You guys have been chatting to us a whole bunch. Offers, deals in the DMs. That's where all the sexy action happens. But yeah, anyway, enough dilly-dallying. It's a juicy show. It's a preview show. It's a great event to be previewing. And without further ado, I believe our first sexy guest is on the line. Dennis, I believe you're about to introduce him.
Living in Las Vegas, always breaking news and doing it in style. There's no doubt in our minds that if MMA media had a version of Ocean's 11, our next guest would be front and center. We're sitting, this man stands and watches the Bellagio fountains with his team after breaking a big scoop and doing an even bigger interview. It's our pleasure to welcome the leader of the Okamoto 11, Brett Okamoto, back to Submission Radio. Brett, great to have you here on the program.
Yeah. Another great intro. You know, not your best though. I think we're stretching a little bit with the Okamoto's 11, but I don't know. Maybe it just caught me off guard too. I'll give it
Do you go to the fountain? Do you ever go to the fountain? Like when you've interviewed Conor McGregor in an exclusive, do you and the ESPN team sit there and stare at the fountain and then nod at each other and walk off in separate directions, but then meet in the same car and go the same way home?
No, it's usually a solo thing, you know, when I nail an interview, and then I'll go, you know, by myself, because I just feel like it's more powerful if you got no one around you, and kind of soak it in just solo, you know. But maybe I'll try it with the ESPN group next time.
Try it, Brett. You might be surprised at how much you like it. I feel like instead of Okamoto 11, it's the Okamoto 1, because Brett's a bit of a renegade. He kind of does things solo, does things one-on-one. But of course, we are here to talk about UFC 248 this weekend. We're excited to break it down with you. But before we do, obviously there's a whole bunch of other things to talk about, some major news from last week that we wanted to quickly cover with you. And one of the main things, obviously, Era reporting that there's this preliminary talks of possibly Justin Gaethje and Conor McGregor fighting in the summer in the US. Just wondering, Brett, as a solo renegade like yourself, what have you heard? And would that be potentially for a June card or maybe even International Fight Week?
Yeah, if it happens, I would anticipate it happening in July.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the UFC has already announced its locations for May and June, and May is Brazil, and June is beautiful Australia. So I don't think Conor's going to be on either one of those cards. So if he fights, I mean, International Fight Week has always been a very obvious home for Conor, but yet he's never fought there. So if it were to happen this year, I think that's always a possibility. In terms of whether or not it happens, I think that the UFC, Dana White, he's been pretty clear about what he thinks. He wants that rematch. If Khabib is able to get past Tony Ferguson in April, I think the UFC looks at that as a big money fight and they want to do it. And I think that they, I'm reading between the lines here, but I just think that they look at it as, well, why would we jeopardize that fight? We know how popular that fight is with all the drama, Khabib jumping out of the cage. Why would we jeopardize it for a fight with Justin Gaethje? Now I know why I would jeopardize it. It's because that's the fight. Justin Gaethje versus Conor McGregor is the fight in my mind. It was probably the fight back in January when Conor came back. I mean, if he's supposed to get a title shot, then he should be the number one contender. And right now, I think Justin Gaethje is the number one contender. But we all know in this sport, sometimes that's not how it works. So I think this really comes down to what it always comes down to with Conor, how much he's pushing to fight. If he is absolutely adamant that he has to fight this summer, I think the UFC would obviously, take that into consideration and try and make it happen. But if he's sort of on the fence, and he's not really pushing for it, I think the UFC is content to just wait and see what happens with Tony and Khabib. One caveat: if Tony beats Khabib, I think that Tony and Conor are fighting. I'm very confident that we would see that fight sooner rather than later.
It's interesting because Dana White mentioned how the Khabib fight, he thinks, might draw 2 million pay-per-view buys. And I guess there's a lot of money on the table for Dana White and the UFC, which is why they keep bringing this Khabib fight up. They see this as an international spectacle, much like what we saw with Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder the other weekend. So my question to you is, if Conor McGregor does fight at Justin Gaethje, and it's a fight that you want to see, it's a fight that me and Casper would love to see, it's a fight that fans around the world would like to see, could it still draw near the amount of money that a Khabib rematch would in your mind, Brett?
I don't think so. Not when you add up, not when you take it into the full spectrum of just the amount of money that a fight between Khabib and Conor would generate. I mean, they are the two biggest stars in the sport right now. Sometimes it doesn't feel like Khabib is on Conor's level, and I would say that from a traditional sense of where the revenue comes from for the UFC and for combat sports, he's not. But we've talked about this before. His imprint on Muslim fans and in his region of the world, he is as big of a star as Conor McGregor, and so you can't compare the two. I mean, Justin Gaethje versus Conor would do very well, but yeah, Khabib versus Conor with all of the things that go along with it would be much bigger.
And I guess the other thing is, and it's kind of a interesting one. Khabib and Justin both have the same manager in Ali Abdelaziz. And sometimes you're wondering, what does a man do in such a position when you have one client potentially, having the opportunity to make one of the biggest pay-per-view gates of all time in Khabib? You got another client in Justin Gaethje who wants to be active. He wants to fight Conor McGregor as well. I mean, when you're breaking that down mentally, like how does that even work? Like from Khabib and Justin's standpoint, they'd want that fight. From Ali's standpoint, he wants the most money, I suppose. Have you heard anything? How would that work going into negotiations like this for the same guy?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of in this sport that those situations exist. I have seen Ali, come out and say publicly, whether it was on Twitter or an interview, accusing Conor of being scared of Justin Gaethje. And I would hope that as Ali's in a unique situation in this particular one, because Justin Gaethje really wants to fight Conor McGregor. Khabib Nurmagomedov does not want to fight Conor McGregor. In fact, he's basically said that he would refuse to even give him a rematch. So perhaps that is making Ali's job a little bit easier when it comes to this particular instance, because on one hand, he has a guy who desperately wants to fight Conor, and that would change his career. And on the other hand, you have a guy who fighting Conor and beating him again would sure make him a little bit bigger than what he is now, but he doesn't really need it, nor does he want it. So I would hope that Ali is doing what he can to get Justin to fight if Conor wants to fight this summer, which we'll see. We'll see if he is really, really adamant about it.
I know this fight is so far away and not even close to sort of, coming together yet, but just sort of, in the sense of having fun. For a long time, people would have sort of picked Justin Gaethje as a favorite going into that fight just because of Conor's inactivity. And of course, Justin sort of improving and looking better with each fight, especially defensively. After that Cerrone win, are you leaning towards either man? And I guess more importantly, did that Cerrone win change anything for you in your mind, Brett, if these two guys were to fight this summer?
Yeah, if they were to fight, I wouldn't say that the Cowboy fight changed a whole lot in my mind. I mean, it was only 40 seconds. It was a very impressive 40 seconds, but it was only 40 seconds. I mean, we all knew Conor was good. That's never been in question. The question has been how motivated he is. And, I mean, again, it's 40 seconds. Like, we didn't get to see his gas tank. We didn't get to see much of him in that fight. But you have to walk away feeling pretty good about Conor's motivation and his focus. And his skill level is, like I said, always been very high. So, if they were to fight, I think the easy breakdown of it is you look at Conor's very crisp, powerful counterboxing, and you look at how easy, I guess, Justin Gaethje, or how willing Justin Gaethje has been to take a punch over the course of his career, and you think those two don't add up in Justin's favor, But then you also think of Justin's pace and the pressure and the way that he mentally breaks guys out there, and I think that I wouldn't say completely that we've seen Conor really, really mentally fold or quit. I wouldn't put those words on him, but we have seen, circumstances where, guys' pace and their pressure have had a very visible effect on him. So I guess that's an easy way of saying it's a close fight, but I would lean Conor, because of the knockout power, especially the knockout power he has at 145 and 155. He hasn't shown it as much maybe at 170 outside of the Cowboy fight, but he's got a lot of power at 155.
Yeah. You just talking about that fight makes me so excited for it, and so sad that we probably won't see it, but who knows, maybe things will line up and things will work out. Now, we'll get killed by the local fans here in Australia if we don't bring up UFC 251 before we go to UFC 248. The first fight confirmed is Valentina Shevchenko versus Jojo Calderwood. And, right now it seems like after the press conference last week that there's some negotiations between Max Holloway and Alex Volkanovski that are sort of holding up that being the main event. I'm just wondering, Brett, what do you think are the sort of holdups in negotiations, especially for a guy like Max Holloway, who recently lost the title and has had a whole bunch of defenses and things that he's been up to? Is there a chance that you think this fight won't come together and there'll be another headlining fight in Australia when the pay-per-view comes on June 7th?
I'll just be very honest here, and I don't know exactly what the holdup is. I mean, it's not unusual for there to be negotiations ahead of a title fight. In fact, it's unusual if there are zero negotiations ahead of a title fight, And sometimes when guys lose their titles, that's when negotiations need to take place because, they're on a deal that puts them back at a lower amount than what they were making before, obviously, and they feel like they should be making more, even though if they're not a champion. And Alex is a brand new champion. A lot of times negotiations will take place after that. So, we're at a situation where it's actually not surprising to me that either one of these guys would want to have a conversation about their contract. Look, I think chances are usually what happens, the UFC and whichever fighter manager they're dealing with, they do come to an agreement. It's not very, very common where we're talking about a fight that just simply did not absolutely come together because of contracts. Sometimes it can take long, and sometimes maybe they even have to move dates, back a little bit. But usually the fights come together. And for this particular one, I mean, I don't see how, from a timing perspective, and also just, Alex Volkanovski winning the title and then having that event right there in Australia, I'd be very surprised if that fight does not end up there. But, we'll have to see.
Absolutely. You mentioned it. The fight, it seems like this card is sort of built around Volkanovski winning the title and defending in Australia. But just quickly, a lot of rumors around the fact that, and you're going to kind of laugh at this, but we've got to bring it up just quickly, Jon Jones potentially fighting down at UFC 251 in Perth. Obviously, it doesn't look likely at all that it's going to happen. But from your knowledge, was it ever discussed for Jon Jones to to come down to Australia and be on that June pay-per-view, possibly fight Jan or Dominic Reyes or someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, he expressed interest in it. I think it could have been a possibility depending on how that Reyes fight went, but I don't think it's a high likelihood now. Just because I now think that Jon will fight Dominic again. I do think that's the fight. I mean, Jan looked spectacular against Corey Anderson, of course, and I feel for the guy, but I mean, with the narrative and the way the fight went with Dominic Reyes, I feel like we're going to see that fight again. And I don't think that's the type of fight that the UFC would take to Australia, quite frankly. And it's not because we don't like you guys, and it's not because the Australian fans aren't amazing. It's just that, hey, Jon Jones has a very compelling fight now, and I would be surprised if they were to move that out of the U.S. I think that fight's going to take place.
The compelling fights get to stay in the U.S., I guess, right? I see. If Jon Jones didn't have any good fights, I guess
for Jon,
Australia.
For Jon, they do. For Jon. Hey, you know what? Maybe it'll all work out. You guys will build up some karma, and you can have Israel Adesanya versus Jon Jones in Australia someday. How about that?
See, that'd be a sexy fight right there. It's a funny thing with these Aussie cards, because whenever things get announced, Aussie fans are like holding their breath, like, oh yeah, that's cool. What else you got? Like, and there's always this hope, like down to the final.
He's going to verse Conor McGregor on this fight night card in Adelaide. Who knows?
There's 1 week before fight night. Everyone's like, look, they might announce a new co-main event. It might happen. If we pray, maybe it'll happen. All right, got to talk UFC 248, Brett. One of the big stories, obviously, from this card was how the UFC couldn't quite get this Till Cannonier fight booked, and it was a fight that a lot of people were looking forward to potentially happening. Just wondering, from your knowledge, what exactly happened? Why couldn't the UFC lock in Till in the end? Was it the visa issues, or was it just down to negotiations?
Well, it was down to negotiations, and they were taking a while. But then what really just completely killed it was Cannonier's injury. They were still actively trying to make that fight happen, and Cannonier got injured because he was still training for it to happen. So the fight wasn't dead. I mean, you can make that conclusion just by knowing the simple fact that Jared got injured. So they were talking to Till, and I think it encompassed a few different things. And they were working on it, and they were hopeful to get it done. And I know that Darren still wanted to come out to Vegas to be at UFC 248. But once Jared got injured, obviously there was just they weren't gonna keep Darren on that card.
It's interesting because you mentioned he had a pec to Cannonier, and he had to sort of pull out of the fight. I saw some headlines even where he's saying that the guy looks superhuman as it is, but he believes he'll be ready to be a backup, even with that injury, even with the recovery. But we also saw Darren say that he wants to be the backup if Yoel Romero misses weight this weekend, UFC 248. I'm just wondering, how likely is it that the UFC still fly Darren out and that he could possibly replace Yoel Romero if Romero has weight issues?
Yeah, I'm curious about that myself. I haven't gotten a clear answer on it. I think it would make sense if Darren was out here. And again, I know that Darren wanted to be out here. I think he wanted to be out here just from the standpoint of even if he's not a backup, or if he is and the fight goes on, I mean, he just wants to be in the building. He wants to watch the fight. He wants to talk about it. He wants to talk about it afterwards. I think he sees an opportunity there. So I would love to see him here. I haven't heard 100% one way or another if he's for certain not coming or for certain going to be here. But yeah, I would love to see him. And I think that the Darren Till, man, is pretty wild. He's only got one win at 185, but I would not, eliminate the possibility that he could sneak in a title contention sooner rather than later, because he and Israel like each other. It's a fan friendly fight, and if he does make it out here to Vegas and make some noise, then the UFC will take a look at it.
Yeah, see, like it would shock me if he snuck in there if he was all good, if he snuck in there this weekend. I just don't think that's a possibility, because Israel sort of wants that in a big stadium show in, say, Liverpool or London. But then Israel also spoke about how if Romero does miss weight, he doesn't know if he'll give him that title shot. He may move on to whoever the backup may be, if there even is a backup. So fingers and toes crossed that Romero makes weight, but if he doesn't, what would you expect to happen in that situation? And I know Robert Whittaker a long time ago told us the same thing, that he wouldn't fight Romero if he missed weight, and Romero did miss weight, and then they did end up fighting. So what do you think happens in this one?
That's what I would guess would happen, is that because, at the end of the day, Israel is the whole reason he's fighting Romero is because he wanted Romero's name on his resume. This was not a fight that anybody was necessarily demanding. It's not a fight the UFC was pressuring him into. this was a fight where Israel, we know he likes to fight. I mean, how many times have we asked Israel over the last year and a half, are you sure you're not cramming too many of these into a short time frame? I mean, don't you want to break? Like, this guy likes to stay active, and he loves the idea of facing Romero, a guy that he knows is very good. And maybe even, a lot of casual fans out there won't tune into this one because they'll be like, who's this Yoel Romero guy? I'm not really familiar with him. It looks like he's lost a couple fights. I like, maybe I'll sit this one out, but Israel wanted this one. So, I mean, unless there was a great alternative to step into the last second, this is a fight that Israel wanted. And I would anticipate him wanting it, even if Romero were to miss weight by a few ounces, but hopefully that doesn't happen.
What are you expecting from the media week for UFC 248? Obviously, we've already seen the press conference not too long ago. They did a follow-up press conference just the other week at UFC Auckland, which was terrible because there was delays and Romero wasn't speaking in English and no one knew what was going on. And Israel Adesanya was sitting there in a funny jacket, not a funny jacket, a nice-looking jacket, but he had like his shorts on. He just came out of training and kind of looked like it was put together last second. And now they're going to be back at it again with this one. Are you expecting to see anything interesting go down in Media Week? These guys seem to kind of outdo each other and one-up each other every time they come face-to-face, whether it's dance battles or anything else in between.
Yeah, I think they're going to entertain us in a way that maybe, like I said, I don't think that this is going to be a home run on the pay-per-views. I don't think this is going to be one that feels like, I mean, and I'm being obvious here, but 2 months ago when we had Conor and Cowboy, like, it's just not going to be that type of feel during this fight week in Vegas. But I asked Israel this, when I saw him in Vegas, actually around that time of, I asked him this in Houston, maybe. That was when they had the press conference. But I basically said, like, this is a fight for the hardcores, right? I mean, this is a fight for the fans who know what they're watching, who are familiar with how good Romero is. And they know all the I love you and see you soon, boy. Like this is one where, like, MMA fans will appreciate and be entertained by this more than I think the casual observers, and that's fine. Sometimes that happens, and again, I think that's credit goes to Israel for putting that type of fight together because he didn't have to. I mean, especially in this day and age, like, you're seeing champions who want to pick and choose their fights, and if anything, what do they want? They want the biggest fights with the least amount of resistance. That's typically what they want, which is fine. That's what I'd want, but Israel is flipping that. He's taking the most resistance, arguably, with the sort of, you could argue a lesser amount of payoff. So I respect them for taking this fight.
When it comes to this fight, I'm just wondering if you're leaning to either man, because like you mentioned, Romero maybe not the biggest pay-per-view draw per se, but arguably one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous guys in the division. Israel, obviously, still undefeated, and every guy, the narrative for Israel is every guy is meant to be the guy to beat him. So when it comes down this weekend, who are you leaning towards in this one?
I'm leaning towards Adesanya. I don't think that I think he wanted this fight, for a reason, because he wanted to prove some things, but also because I think he's very confident in it. And you know what, man? I mean, Father Time is undefeated, and Yoel has beat Father Time better than just about anyone I have ever seen ever in this sport. But eventually, Father Time is going to get Yoel Romero, and if it's a little bit slower reflexes, if it's a little bit less gas in the tank when it comes to a 4th and 5th round, those are the type of things that I think the momentum that Israel has behind him, like those are the types of things that will cost you fights. So I'm pretty confident leaning towards Israel, but again, it's Yoel. I mean, he could definitely go out there and beat him.
Absolutely. And also, we spoke to Abe about this, the fact that the man could go up to light heavyweight tomorrow if Jon Jones moves up and possibly have a great run there as well, but still sticking at middleweight all these years. It's pretty impressive. Just quickly, Brett, as we get off this fight, I mean, you mentioned it, Darren Till, he's in a great position to potentially fight Israel next. Just lay out the sort of blueprint in your mind right now for us into what the next few fights might look like for Israel leading into a potential Jon Jones fight. You've got Darren Till, obviously you got Paulo Costa as well. You got Jared Cannonier hanging around the wings, and even Robert Whittaker, who may potentially be making a comeback. Hopefully everything sort of works out with him in his personal life. If you had to sort of pick, I suppose, a road to Jon Jones and those 2-3 fights that lead into that Jon Jones super fight next year, how would you sort of book it?
I think in a perfect world, it would be Romero. Then it would be Paulo Costa. because he is still waiting in the wings. And even though I don't think Costa is a huge fight as of today, I think the build up to that fight it's going to be bigger whenever it happens than it is right now. You know, a lot of people aren't super familiar with Paulo Costa, but when you take a man with that kind of body and you put cameras on him and then you show his highlight reel, you know, people tend to take notice of that.
It's a little bit when you ask questions at the press conference, Brett.
Exactly right. So I think it's those two, and then if you're the UFC, you know, you don't admit this because, you know, you're not rooting for anybody, but I think you hope that Darren Till gets one more win at 185 pounds, and he has, you know, a nice post-fight interview, which he's very capable of delivering in his Liverpudlian accent, you know, and he starts talking about Adesanya, and so that's it. You know, you have Romero, then you have a rivalry with a guy in Costa, and then you have, you know, a fight between two very popular guys, and hopefully, you know, some kind of fun location between him and Till. And then if he's wiped all those out, then maybe he can go fight Jon Jones.
Oh man, we can definitely dream. Brett, we'll let you go in a moment, but just wanted to really quickly touch on Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jedrzejczyk. I'm just wondering, you know, in this one, Joanna sort of seemed like a bit of a favorite in the UFC, someone who the UFC wanted to sort of keep winning, a good draw for that division. But then you got Weili Zhang, who's obviously got the Chinese market behind her. I'm just wondering, from your knowledge and your understanding, how big is Weili Zhang in China? Did things take off for her the way the UFC expected? And in this fight, if you had to guess, who do you think the UFC would sort of prefer winning from a sort of drawing perspective?
I think that Zhang is definitely on her way, and she has. I think the response in China, from what I've heard, has been very strong and very positive. You know, I mean, I'm not super familiar with China and their media structure and their social media structure, but you know, you see certain numbers, and obviously it's, you know, numbers that a lot of times are coming from the UFC, and so they want to tell a certain story, but numbers are numbers, right? And the interactions that she's had over there on some of the social media platforms and things of that nature have been very good, you know. And I mean, you go on Weili Zhang's Instagram, you're seeing Dana White like every single one of her posts. He's not doing that for every fighter. And why is he doing that? I mean, because I think he likes Weili Zhang, but also he likes having a Chinese champion. It's a market that they really want to break into, and they've wanted to break into for a long time. So, I mean, that said, I think that they're fine either way. I know that, like you mentioned right at the top, Joanna was sort of a quote unquote favorite of the UFC's for a while. She's always had a good relationship with Dana White from her first UFC debut. I mean, she came out and fought, and then went out immediately after a fight and sat next to Dana for the rest of the card. You know, he's always seen the talent in her, and she's obviously delivered by being, to this point, the most dominant strawweight champion of all time. So I think that they're comfortable either way. But of course, I mean, having a Chinese champion right now is good for the UFC. I mean, they are really trying to break into that market in a way that has been kind of stonewalled to them up to this point. So if she makes it easier, then yeah, they don't mind her having her at the top.
I mean, as we wrap the prediction for this one, it's going to be an interesting one. You got a veteran like Joanna, who is technical and dangerous and experienced, and obviously Weili, she's super dangerous at the start of the fight. A lot of people sort of comparing it to Mike Tyson, absolutely devastating fashion in the way she's been able to finish girls. Who do you think is going to win this one come this weekend?
Whew, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I mean, Zhang has just looked so good. And I mean, what did I just say though about Conor's fight with Cowboy? You know, as nice as a quick knockout is, you don't get to take a whole lot from it. I do think that there is some truth to Joanna. There's now, I don't want to say a blueprint out to beat her, but there's you know, I think there is some pressure on her to bring something new to the table. You know, she's had this dominant fighting style, and her dominance has fallen off over the last couple of years. And I think that's because people have found ways to make her uncomfortable and to sort of neutralize what she does very well. So I think there is pressure on her to bring something new to this fight. I'm leaning Zhang right now, but you know, by Saturday I might be picking Joanna. It's a tough fight to call.
Absolutely. And a great analysis there. It's one of those fights where it's the variables on the night are going to dictate how this fight's going to go. You know, you zip one way, you zip the other way, you make it a round later, and everything might change. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what happens in the division there. Guys, make sure to follow Brett on Twitter for all your latest breaking news, and of course his UFC 248 coverage at B Okamoto, ESPN on Twitter, and ESPN MMA on YouTube. Just quickly as you wrap up, Brett, a couple of things people can look out for during fight week from Brett Ocean himself, the solo Danny Ocean, the solo fountain man. What
yeah, well, I mean, you already plugged my social media accounts, and obviously I'll post everything I do on those. But follow our YouTube channel as well, YouTube, ESPN, MMA, myself, Ariel Hawani, Mark Ramondi. We've been, we've been doing daily recaps of some of the things that we see, eyes and ears on the ground at these different pay-per-views, and obviously lots of interviews with the fighters, with the coaches, and then we have a weigh-in show on Friday morning as well, which is pretty fun. So check that out.
See, Ariel could be kind of like the Brad Pitt, and Mark Ramondi. We all know he's Matt Damon, stealing people's wallets in the buses. It's great to have you on the show, Brett. Thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to see your coverage, and always an honor having you on the program.
Thanks, guys. Good talking to you.
Thanks, Brett.
Hey, this is Tony Okagui Ferguson, and you guys listen to Submission Radio. Keep tuning in, guys.
All right, guys. Our next guest is not only one of the best analysts in MMA, but also one of the busiest men in MMA with a whole array of excellent podcasts he regularly puts out, including The War Room, where he breaks down previews and dissects fights. There's Listen, which he co-hosts with Mark Goddard, who we're also fans of. There's also Full Reptile Radio, also on his YouTube channel. He also does fantastic work for BT Sport. Oh, and let's not forget, he's also a regular UFC commentator and former UFC title challenger. There is only one Dan Hardy, and he's kind enough to join us today. Dan, how are you? And how is it even possible that you fit all of this into your life? Oh, and Inside the Octagon. Almost forgot that one.
I'm good. That's quite the intro. Feel like I'm being inducted into the Hall of Fame or something.
Yeah.
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, I got off a plane yesterday from New Zealand. I spent 30 hours on the journey over researching Adesanya, Romero, and Woodley against Edwards.
Nice.
Because they are the Inside the Octagons that we record tomorrow. So I got off the plane and went straight to the studio to start preparing. The thing that fuels me is my love for martial arts. I'm completely addicted to this sport, and it's a privilege to be doing the job that I'm doing.
Well, we love it, man, and we definitely benefit from you doing such a great job. We've got you to help us preview UFC 248, specifically the Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero fight that's going to be coming up in the main event. I mean, I don't know if you heard it from the show, but his coach, Eugene Behrman, was on the program, Israel's coach, and they said that they want to Alex Volkanovski Romero and get a different type of victory, one when there's no doubt about who won. What do you think that means? And what do you think is a different type of victory over a guy like Yoel Romero?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. And the main question is, why would he decide to defend his belt against one of the most dangerous middleweights on a losing streak? Which I think is the most fascinating question. And it's because he knows how dangerous Yoel Romero is, and so does everybody else. And there's not a single person that's fought Yoel Romero and made it look easy. Nobody has. The people that have beat him have not made it look easy. I mean, I watched the Paulo Costa fight yesterday, and I mean, Costa edged it. It was closer than I thought it was, though. I mean, I could even see it scored for Romero in some ways. But Costa's face was mangled after that fight. And everybody that fights Romero gets wrecked in some way. Even like Rocco damaged his leg kicking him. He's got this air about him that's quite terrifying. And I think what Israel Adesanya wants to do is to beat him better than anybody else, cleaner than anybody else. I know he was annoyed that he got caught when he was trading with Rob Whittaker when he got the finish. I think he knows if Yoel Romero catches him, there's a good job that he wakes up with his back on the canvas. And I think he likes that challenge. I think he sees that everybody else respects that challenge in front of him. And I think what he means by beating him, like Volkanovski, is leaving no doubt is by outpointing him comfortably and not getting touched, showing us his true grasp of what martial arts capability he has.
Let me ask you, what do you think would be more impressive if Israel Adesanya was to go in there and knock out Romero, a guy who a lot of people think, in some ways can't be knocked out, or if he was to stay in there with him over the course of 5 rounds, knowing how dangerous Romero is and, like you said, just outpoint him and not really get touched?
Honestly, I would be impressed either way. I think the challenge is to get to the end of the 25 minutes or however long the fight is without getting really damaged. Israel's at the beginning of his career as a champion. The last thing he wants is to be derailed for 12 months. And that's potentially what Yoel Romero represents to anybody that's fighting him. So the biggest thing for Israel is it doesn't matter how he wins, as long as he does it and he's able to step out of the octagon healthily of his own accord, that's the victory. I think knocking him out would be very impressive, but I also think cooking him over the 25 minutes would be very impressive as well. But when I say cooking him, I mean beating him up without getting beaten up yourself. And that's really the challenge here.
I want to ask you, Dan, what do you think is sort of the toughest thing for Israel to overcome in this one? Is it sort of keeping the distance from Romero, making sure he doesn't get into that danger zone? Is it Romero's devastating KO power, his hand speed, his forward pressure, or the fact that he's, dangerous all the way through the fight and isn't really predictable in what he might do?
That's exactly it. It's the unpredictability and the fact that he's quite happy to just kind of hang back and let you work. Going back to the Costa fight, I feel like if that was over 25 minutes, Romero would have done a lot of damage to him, if not stopped him in the fourth or fifth. Romero's got 6 stoppages now in the third round, but there's this perception that he's a very fast fighter. He's not. He moves quickly. He's very, very quick. He's very, very agile, especially for someone that's nearly 43. The thing with Yoel Romero that makes him dangerous is that, and I think we did see this with Costa a little bit. If you feel like you win and if you feel like you're beating him up, you put yourself at more of a risk, start throwing more shots, and then he clubs you with one shot and takes you off your feet. That's where Adesanya's got to play this very, very smart and always respect Yoel Romero's danger, because that 0 to 60 that Yoel Romero's got is enough to blast anybody out of the octagon. And Adesanya's not. I mean, he's got knockout power, of course, but it's much more down to efficiency of technique. And something that I stole off Teddy Atlas, the great boxing analyst and coach, putting water in the basement. It's like money in the bank, water in the basement. It's slowing him down. It's beating him up over time. And to go in there and beat Yoel Romero with one big shot, I don't think there's anybody in the division that can do that, to be honest. I mean, his neck doesn't move a great deal. I think you'll notice the scar on the back of his neck. I actually think his vertebrae fused together from a previous injury. It's going to make him even more difficult to knock out. So I think the smart thing for Adesanya to do is to mix his targets up and to slowly beat him up and make him more vulnerable. When someone gets tired, when someone's breathing with their mouth open, they're easier to knock out. You can do those things by jabbing them to the body. You can jab them to the body when you slow them down by beating up their legs. So that slow cooking, which is what Max Holloway used to do very well in his fights, and actually had that done to him by Volkanovski. I expect them to try and do the same thing there.
Eugene Behrman was on the program, head coach over at City Kickboxing. He mentioned that a leopard doesn't change its spots, and they expect Yoel Romero to be unpredictable, like you mentioned, and sort of dangerous and sort of out there doing crazy things. But I'm just wondering, if you're looking at it from Yoel's perspective and also America Top Team's perspective, standing on the outside and copying shots against a guy like Israel Adesanya just seems like a very, very bad idea. Do you anticipate then possibly Yoel Romero might surprise us all and come out with a completely different game plan, be a lot more active and a lot more or less willing to stay back, take shots, and be the unpredictable Romero that we've seen in his last few fights?
I mean, there is definitely a possibility. I just think it's a very, very slim one. I think that Romero, I think first of all, Romero realizes that over 25 minutes, it doesn't matter how good an athlete he is. He has the physique that will slow down, because every time he commits to something, he's really, really putting everything into it. I mean, he does do the playing thing, the touch and the tap thing, but that's no danger at all. When Adesanya's doing the touch and tap striking, he's still snapping with it. It's still damaging. Whereas Romero's only impactful when he's got his foot fully on the gas. And that is a massive taxation on his cardio, which I think he knows will not hold up over 25 minutes against anybody. Just because, I mean, physiologically, it's kind of superhuman anyway, what he's able to do. And I think that would be an even bigger ask of someone with that kind of physique. So I think the idea of him coming out starting fast would only leave him more vulnerable in the later rounds. I think he's more likely to take the first 2 rounds off and then fight hard for the last 3 and try and be really impactful. I expect in the first couple of rounds he's going to try and catch Adesanya with counters. Hope to catch him slipping, catch him stepping too far in, getting a little overzealous, and catch him a little bit like Gastelum did. I think Romero sees that opportunity to club him with one big shot in the first couple of rounds, and I think he'll be happy to hang back and do it. It's Adesanya that's got to start steadily, but keep himself safe and just slowly build his pressure up over time. Because Romero, the longer the fight goes and the slower he starts in the beginning, the more dangerous he is later in the fight.
It's an interesting thing. One of the reasons why people think this is such a dangerous matchup for Adesanya is because of Romero's wrestling. Obviously, he's super dangerous on the feet, but people say, hey, he's dangerous on the feet and he's got that world-class wrestling. But one of the things we saw between the Robert Whittaker fights is in the second one, Romero just really didn't use the wrestling a whole lot. And a lot of people believe it's because of the cardio. He tries to sort of save himself. Do you think we're going to see a lot of wrestling in this fight? Maybe Romero looking to put Adesanya on his back, or do you think it's going to be similar to the second Whittaker fight where he tries to conserve himself?
No, I think you're right. I don't think he's going to really use his wrestling a great deal unless he really needs to, unless he feels like he's really under pressure. Or from the Costa fight, he was I think he got 2 takedowns right at the end of the round, like the last 5 or 10 seconds. Yeah. That to me tells me that in his mindset he's working on the old idea that stealing around with a takedown works, and I don't think it does anymore. I think the judges are a bit wiser to that now. So I think if we do see Romero shoot a takedown, it will be towards the end of a round, and it will be kind of fruitless. I think he realizes that by employing wrestling earlier in the round, he's only going to leave him fatigued, towards the later part of the round, because even if he takes Adesanya down and controls him on the ground for the first round, every time he takes him down, Adesanya is going to be fighting to get back up. He's going to be trying to defend those takedowns. It's going to get more and more effort, and Adesanya is not going to accept being on his back. He's not just going to stay there. He's going to constantly be fighting to get off his back, which is going to be fatiguing for Yoel Romero. The only other way I see him using his wrestling is kind of like he did against Machida. But same thing, he spent 2 rounds kickboxing with a guy that he didn't need to kickbox with, and then just decided he wants to change pace, took him down and smashed him with elbows. I think if he does take him down, he's got to work fast. But I think he gives Adesanya the respect and the understanding that he's tough enough to not be put away that easy.
It's a fascinating matchup. I think the cage is going to come into play for this one as well. I'm just wondering, Dan, do you think Yoel Romero will be able to utilize the cage to potentially get Israel up against there and uses dirty boxing, uses clinching to sort of work some short shots and elbows and uppercuts? And do you anticipate we'll see Israel circling a lot rather than moving backwards in sort of anticipation of those kinds of techniques?
I think ultimately it will be Israel pushing from the center and forcing Romero back up against the fence. The thing that we've seen in Yoel Romero recently, especially between the 2 Rob Whittaker fights, in the first Whittaker fight he was moving, he was quite mobile, he was on his toes, he kept hopping in with that oblique kick to the knee. He started at a fairly steady pace, and I feel like in that fight he learned a lesson, and he felt like he slowed down over the 25 minutes. What we saw in the next fight against Rob Whittaker was a much more stationary Yoel Romero. He was standing in range. He was walking into range. He was even doing this weird kind of Wing Chun Kung Fu guard. It was very unusual. But against Whittaker, we saw that he's a little predictable when he fought Adesanya in his fight, because he was rushing forward with the same kind of shots over and over again. When Yoel Romero was backed up against the fence with Costa and he was under fire, he's doing the same thing. He's blocking the shots. He's slipping out the way of stuff. He's got great reactions. I mean, I talk about it inside the octagon. He slips an elbow, which is crazy because it's not something he would have ever really drilled, I would imagine, in a fight. So he's very recognizing things. The difference with I would say, Paulo Costa for sure, Rob Whittaker to a lesser extent, but definitely the opposite end of the spectrum is Adesanya, is the way that they throw shots. Paulo Costa might as well send you a postcard when he's throwing a punch, because you can see him winding up from the other side of the octagon. So Yoel Romero can bank that when he pulls that right arm back, that right hook's coming, so he can prepare for it. If you watch, especially Adesanya against Rob Wilkinson in his debut, where he just dominated him, you can see how he mixes up his targets. He feints the kick to throw the jab. He feints the jab to throw the knee. He's so good at disguising his intentions when he's in there. And I think that's the problem for Yoel Romero if he does decide to use that tight guard and walk his way in. I'm not saying that Adesanya won't hurt himself hitting Yoel Romero, because that seems to be quite a common tactic for Romero to basically use his steely build as a weapon. But I do think that Adesanya will be able to pick him apart a little easier because he's more more efficient and more experienced in his striking than other people that Romero has fought before.
It's interesting because we always see Adesanya improving with every fight, and he learns from his mistakes. It seems like he's plugged up those holes from the Gastelum fight. I'm wondering what you sort of see as, I guess, his sort of biggest weapon in this one, and also City Kickboxing's love of feints and feinting. I'm wondering how big of a factor that could be in this fight if Adesanya can sort of employ that, more or better than previous opponents, and if that could help him sort of produce that desired result of, Volkanovskiing Romero and leaving no doubt as to who won.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think he started it in his UFC debut using those nice feints, and he's just gotten better at it over time. He was using good feints against Rob Whittaker as well, feinting the low kick, coming with the left hook. I think that'll be a big part of his game. But I think the main weapon that he brings into the octagon is patience. And I think we saw that in the first round against Rob Whittaker when Whittaker was charging forward and Adesanya was quite happy to give him the space. He wasn't stubborn about this is my canvas and I'm holding ground, because that's what will get you knocked out against Romero, standing your ground and trying to fight force with force. I think as soon as Adesanya feels like there's a flurry coming, he's just going to clear out the way. He'll back up, he'll circle away, and then he'll slowly work his way into the center, because he knows that nitrous tank that Romero's got his finger on the button all the time, he can only press that button so many times. And the more times he sprints forward and misses, the easier it's going to be for Adesanya to pick him off. And I think with the Whittaker fight, it's a good example. It only took him 2 rounds, not even. He gave him space in the first round, backed up, moved away, allowed him to get those flurries out of his system, but also paid attention to the directions he was going and his choice of weapons. Then, as the fight started to progress, at the end of the first round, he thought, I'm going to stay in the pocket a little bit here, and dropped him clean. Then the second round came about, and it was the same situation again. He was cashing in with the right hook as he was slipping out and hurting clean with the right hook, and then the finish was a right hook, left hook. And that is him giving just enough space to be out of danger, but be able to stay in range to land his own shots. And like I said, he even took a shot in that fight to land, and he was annoyed about that. I think he wants to be even cleaner with Yoel Romero, which means he's going to give a bit more time. If he sees Yoel Romero moving, he'll just get out of the way, avoid that fire.
I mean, it looks like the story for a long time with Israel and his entire UFC run has always been that, the next guy is the guy to beat him, or that he has the style that will give Israel the most problems. If Israel goes in there and beats Yoel Romero, do you think that narrative goes away? Do you think he'll start to become the favorite in his future fights? And do you think that Yoel Romero, where would you rank him as one of the toughest challenges for Israel when it comes to the middleweight division in his title run?
Honestly, I think Yoel Romero's top 3 of challengers for any middleweight in the world. I think with the danger and the threat that he brings, with the power and the speed that he moves at. I mean, we know he's got wrestling credentials, but we don't really see them. But the knockout power that he's got is a serious thing. And one of the reasons why he's so effective is because he's not really fundamentally very sound. He's quite chaotic. Things come at weird angles. I think we've seen a refinement in the last few years. I mean, the double jab cross against Rockhold was a thing of beauty, but it's very rare we see him set up a power shot with a double jab. I think he's a very, very serious threat, and I have a lot of respect for Adesanya for taking this fight. I think he realized that it will silence a lot of critics if he wins, but at the same time, you're always going to get those people that you look at someone that makes things look very easy, and you think, that person can beat them. I think Conor's experienced the same thing. I think every lightweight, featherweight, and welterweight in the world has put their hand up at some point and said, I think I've got the tools to beat Conor. And I think it's a different thing when you get in there, and I think Adesanya is the same. There was a point where everyone thought, this is the right person to beat Anderson Silva. And it got to the stage where every time he was stepping into the octagon, it was just like, there's not even any point in this title defense because he's going to make it look too easy. And I think Adesanya is probably 2-3 fights away from that status, but he's working his way.
Yeah, it'd be crazy for him to reach that status, so early in his career, especially considering how many fights he's had in such a short amount of time. I know Adesanya doesn't really want to talk about this at this point, but this Jon Jones fight seems like it may happen, if and when Adesanya can get past a few more title challenges. I'm just wondering, Dan, how interested personally are you in that fight actually happening? And would you give Adesanya a chance? And did Jon Jones's performance against Dominic Reyes change how you think that fight might look?
Yes, it did a lot. It's and Adesanya actually talked about this on stage in Auckland. I think he felt like Jon Jones kind of showed a slowing of his game in that fight. I don't necessarily think that's the right phrasing for it. I don't think Jon Jones is slowing down necessarily, but I certainly feel like he doesn't really identify many challenges in his division, and I'm not sure whether it's challenging him enough to keep raising his game like he was in his early years. I think maybe Adesanya stepping up as a real challenge, a real threat would kind of, what was it that Jon Jones kept saying, which was really weird, tickle his pickle or something. I think
yeah.
I think it might be the right thing to get him really fired up and ready for a fight. But I absolutely give Adesanya a chance in that. If we see the Jon Jones that we've seen in the last couple of fights, that he doesn't seem as confident as he used to be. Doesn't seem as confident in throwing his hands like he used to. I mean, like you think about back to his Rashad Evans fight or his Teixeira fight, where he's just stepping into the breach with elbows and just smashing people up. It takes a confidence to do that, and I think that I think Gustafsson scared the crap out of him a little bit in those first couple of rounds, and it changed his game a bit. I mean, he was fortunate to get away with the win in that one, but you remember what happened with Matt Serra and GSP. That changed GSP's approach to things, and I do think that this has changed Jon Jones's approach a little bit. I think. You look at the Santos fight. I feel like he could have stopped Santos, especially with that knee injury. I feel like he could have probably got Anthony Smith out of there. Anthony Smith's incredibly tough, but when there's nothing coming back at you, there's no reason not to put your foot on the gas. So I think he has cruised a little bit, and I think if he tries to cruise against Adesanya, there's a lot of holes in his game that Adesanya could exploit with feints and head movements, and and the reality is, by the time Adesanya gets to that stage, if he beats Romero and maybe somebody else afterwards, we're going to be thinking about him as a much more serious threat to anybody that he fights, including Stipe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Dan. Eugene Behrman on the program speaking about the fact that he wants to hop over Jon Jones and go up to heavyweight and fight a guy like Stipe. Israel's always done that throughout his career in kickboxing, go up weight classes. It's what they believe in at City Kickboxing, defeating the division and then moving up to greater challenges. So from your perspective, when you hear Coach Eugene Behrman talk about a potential Stipe Israel Adesanya fight, and a lot of people are very critical about this, is this something that sounds realistic to you? Israel going in there and dethroning, one of the most successful sort of UFC heavyweights in quite some time?
I think there's a bit of mind games being played, if I'm honest. I think that Adesanya would absolutely take that fight, and he would like that challenge at some point in his future. But as of right now, there's no point in stepping up to fight Stipe. The middleweight division's still got a few guys in it they can fight. And I think it was kind of a poke at Jon Jones. Like, well, you keep talking about going up and fighting Stipe. And Jones is a legit heavyweight when he decides to be. When he steps up to heavyweight, he's going to be bigger than most guys in there anyway. Whereas Adesanya, it's more of a challenge because he's not as big as Jon Jones. He's certainly not as big as Stipe. So I think that there's a bit of teasing of Jon Jones. I think they're maybe trying to smoke him out, see if he actually will go up to heavyweight. And the benefit goes two ways. I mean, if he steps up to heavyweight, that's going to add muscle onto the frame of Jon Jones, which will slow him down, which suits Adesanya, even if he comes back down to light heavyweight. It also sees how he does at heavyweight in comparison to Stipe, who's, Jon Jones has not got too dissimilar style to Adesanya in a lot of ways, the way that he fights, he uses range. So I think that there's lessons to be learned if he does step up and fight Stipe. And it also opens up the light heavyweight division. If he convinces Jones to step up and fight Stipe, that light heavyweight belt is up for grabs. And that is an absolute surefire way of getting Jon Jones into a fight if he steps in and takes the vacant belt off whoever is at the top of the tree at the time.
Probably Yoel Romero moving up weight classes and becoming champion there. Jon Jones moves up and then a rematch. Just quickly, though, with that Jon Jones match, and we want to quickly get your thoughts on who you think is going to win between Romero and Adesanya in just a second. But just with that Jon Jones fight, we've seen Jon Jones want to beat his opponents in the area where they're best at. And obviously, Israel is a remarkable striker, an absolute expert and specialist, not saying that he hasn't grown his grappling game and his wrestling game and his submission game in the meantime, but that is the sort of area where he excels at. Do you see a Jon Jones that tries to outstrike Israel just to set a point like he has previously with guys like Santos? Or do you see a Jon Jones that realizes that Israel is a real threat and sort of uses more wrestling in more areas that he believes he's stronger in, grappling-wise, in order to win that fight?
Yeah, I think the thing with Jon Jones is that he always knows that he's got the opportunity to grapple. You know, if he decides, he'll probably decide he wants to strike and trade because he's got a huge reach advantage still over Adesanya. He's got a lot of damaging tools and weapons that Adesanya's not faced before. I mean, that oblique kick, I expect we're going to see it a little bit from Romero, but the way that Jones and Romero throw that kick are very different. Like, Romero leaps in, there's an opportunity to get out of the way of that. Jon Jones just smashes that lead leg from where he's standing. And the range of Jon Jones is a real challenge for Adesanya because he utilizes his range so well against other people. He'd have to kind of almost reverse engineer other people's approach to him. He has to then be the problem for the taller guy. Jon Jones having the wrestling to fall back upon, I think, is a confidence builder and a safety net for Jon Jones. But what we learned from the Reyes fight is that if the takedown doesn't happen, it actually makes him more vulnerable on the feet. And that's not a vulnerability that you want to feel. If you feel like you're losing the strike in exchange, you shoot a takedown and you either get it and the guy gets straight back to his feet, or you get denied entirely. Then you literally know you're okay. Now I've got to strike with this guy that's already beaten me. So I don't know. I think there's a hard-headedness to Jon Jones that will try and force himself to win the striking match. And I think if we do see him wrestle, I think it's because he feels like he's getting bettered. The other thing as well is I don't think Jon Jones would want anyone to go, oh, well, of course you out-wrestled him because you're bigger, stronger. You know, that would kind of rob him of that victory. Knocking him out clean at range with one punch would be beating Adesanya at his game. And I think that's really what Jon Jones would want to do if the opportunity ever arose.
Oh, man. Hearing you talk about this fight, Dan, makes me wish that it was a lot sooner than later. But just going back to, obviously, Romero and Adesanya, who are you leaning towards in this one? I think you said before that you expect Adesanya to kind of pick him apart a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's Adesanya's fight to lose. I mean, that doesn't at all diminish the threat of Yoel Romero. You know, there's always that intangible, that massive shot, that flying knee, that whatever it is, or that oblique kick that tears his knee apart. You know, there are lots and lots of things that Romero can do in a split second. Even if he's lost the other 24 minutes of the fight, he can always change that around. I think the odds are stacked in Adesanya's favor because he's the technician. He's a better technical fighter than Yoel Romero. Doesn't necessarily have the explosive capabilities, but has got the endurance and enough strength to make those shots count over the time. I feel like it's Adesanya's fight to lose, but the threat of losing is a very real one.
Absolutely, Dan. We do appreciate your time. I know we said it'd be a quick one, but your insight has just made us have so many questions, and we apologize because we know it's late over there in London. So we'll let you go. Just a couple more questions. Just very, very quickly, Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jedrzejczyk is going to be a fight that's going to be in the co-main event. Weili just absolutely impressed everybody with her title win over Jessica Andrade back in August. Obviously, Joanna, unbelievable legacy as a champion, someone that's incredibly technical, someone with a whole lot of experience in that octagon, has been in absolute wars going all the way through to the 5th round. What are you expecting from this fight? And do you think Weili is going to be able to overcome someone like Joanna, who's accomplished so much in the UFC and is someone who's so experienced going into this fight?
I think Weili's got a very, very good chance. Joanna's a fantastic fighter. She's very, very good. She knows what she's good at. She gravitates her entire game to it. She's a good Thai boxer. She's got great takedown defense, and she punishes you when you shoot. What we've seen from Joanna though is like it's volume striking. It's wearing people down with a barrage, exhausting people. You know, like think back to the Jessica Penne fight. I was octagon side for that one, and it got to the stage where you just like there's just nothing coming back. But there was never one of those big bang shots where you just see her drop. And that's, I think, the difference with Zhang Weili. Nobody else has done what she did to Jessica Andrade, because Jessica Andrade is the pile driver. That's what her nickname translates. Yeah. So, like, she's the one that's the wrecking ball in there. She's none of the one that's smashing these strawweights to pieces. I think she met her match in Zhang Weili, and someone that's got the same kind of force and power and capability in a physical presence, but also in a technical presence as well. And I think that even if she's at a slight technical deficit in comparison to Joanna, the impact of her shots could make the big difference. I think this is a very tough fight for Joanna because she's got to win the marathon. And I think Zhang Weili can cause her problems all the way through the fight. And the other thing as well, I'm really enjoying following Zhang Weili on Instagram, watching the way that she's training. There's something very kind of old school about it. She's doing a lot of stuff like where she's up on her toes, holding kettlebells and stuff. It's a lot of the stuff that Shaolin monks used to do. And I don't know whether that's where she's generating the power from. There's a stability in her style which will carry her through a lot of things. I'm excited to see what she can do. I don't want to jump the gun, but I want to see her fight Shevchenko as well, because I think if she gets past Joanna, that's the next logical matchup.
Wow, that'd be a fascinating matchup. I was curious, do you think we're going to see Weili Zhang at 100%? Because she's been dealing with, moving her training camps due to the coronavirus, visa battles, all these kinds of things. As a fighter yourself, Dan, you understand the mental pressures and all the distractions that come with fighting. It's not just showing up. Do you think we're going to get a 100% Weili Zhang in this fight?
Honestly, I do, yeah. I mean, like I said, following her on Instagram, it looks like she's got her training on lockdown. It looks like she's got a team of people around her that are looking after her and that are guiding her very well. From what I understand, she was out of China really before there was much concern to be out of China. I understand that she's been in Thailand training. Now she's in Vegas already. So I think she's handled it perfectly. And I'll be honest, what we saw from the Chinese fighters in Auckland, two fighters that come to mind that had to move their training camps to Thailand, Song Kenan and Yan Xiaonan. They both had to get out of China pretty quickly. And I mean, Song Kenan was within a day of having to get out of China before he wouldn't be allowed into New Zealand. So he kept it real tight. He won by a spectacular knockout, really crisp. And Yan Xiaonan is another wrecking ball in this division. We've got to keep an eye on her as well. She looked great. So I don't think training in China is particularly easy anyway. I think no matter where they train and what they do, it's a difficult and arduous process. I've trained over there myself, and the facilities are not great. And I think that anytime they step outside of that, go to Thailand or go to the US or whatever, I think it might be quite a refreshing feeling to see what the rest of the world looks like and is doing. And I can only imagine martial artists like Zhang Weili will take that in their stride.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dan Hardy, you have gotten us excited for UFC 248 this weekend. Final question, we promise, before we let you go. And that is just a fun one that a lot of the fans have been talking about last week. So we just want to quickly gauge your thoughts on this. It's outside of UFC 248, but it's a dream matchup that everybody's been talking about. So we just want to let you go on this. Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje right now. It doesn't look like it's going to be happening. It's right now in preliminary talks. And it doesn't look like the UFC are going to put it together. It does look like Khabib might get that rematch with Conor McGregor. But let's say the gods line up, everything lines up perfectly, and we get this massive, massive clash between these two titans. Who do you think, if you're looking at this right now, Conor McGregor, incredible power, look, fantastic UFC 246, looks like he's back mentally, physically, back to training, just looks like he's maybe the Conor McGregor that we saw around UFC 205, and Justin Gaethje, who's improved so much from, his PFL days, is in there, sort of absolute killer, has some defense now, but also brings that action when it comes to striking, also unbelievable grappling, he doesn't really use it. When you look at this matchup right now, how does that sort of come together in your mind? A fight genius like yourself, who do you think sort of comes out on top when you look at these two guys matching up? It's an unbelievable matchup.
It is. It is. So you've got Conor coming back down to 155, which is where the fight's most likely to be. He looked great at welterweight. I wonder how that transfers back down to 155, because I do feel like he put muscle mass on. Shoulders and triceps were a lot bigger. So there's a question how that weight cut goes and how that reacts if Gaethje tries to wrestle him. We go back to the Chad Mendes fight, and someone with a full training camp and a skill set of Chad Mendes might have had more of an impact on Conor on that night, because he had a damn good go and he was stepping in on short notice. You've got to think Justin Gaethje is a decent bit bigger than Chad Mendes. He's got that wrestling offensive if he needs it, and he can hustle for 25 minutes if he needs it. But he also maintains that power to late in the rounds. So there are a lot of ways that Justin Gaethje can be a problem for Conor, especially if Conor struggles back down to 55 and he's not the same fighter that he was against Cowboy. On the other hand, this is a fight where Conor can basically tee off on someone that puts his face in the fire. And Conor's got the knockout power to put anybody in this division down, at welterweight as well, I would say, if he lands clean. So there's a risk of Justin Gaethje just getting lit up from a distance and being too hard-headed to change his tact. But he has always got that second option of forcing Conor up against the fence and forcing him to deal with his wrestling. And that's where the question comes in of, has Conor improved in his takedown defense since we've seen him in previous fights, which I'm sure he has. And then the big question is, what does he look like at 155? Because, even though he was a 45er, he looked like Skeletor at 45. He looked healthy at 55. He looked big at 170. Going back down to 155, I think he might look and feel different, and that can be teased out of him with a heavy wrestling offensive. So I'm going to sit right on the fence and say, take my money, please. I want to watch that fight.
Good. All right. Well, if Dan Hardy's on board, that means hopefully this fight gets made and comes together. Guys, follow them out on Twitter and Instagram at Dan Hardy MMA. I know you're filming Inside the Octagon tomorrow with good friend of the program, John Gooden, and we can't wait to see what you guys put together for this UFC 248 preview, and also Tyron Woodley versus Leon Edwards. The man has so much content, it's insane. Follow his channel, Full Reptile. Also, the guys at Full Reptile, the crew back that do a lot of the work and the event coverage, are great guys as well. There's the War Room, there's Listen with Mark Goddard, there's his excellent work on BT Sport, also his book, Full Reptile. Dan, absolute honor having you on. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Always good talking to you. Enjoy the fights.
And there you guys go, UFC 248 preview show in the books. A big thank you to Dan Hardy and Brett Okamoto for coming onto the program. A big thank you to you guys for all your support through social media, through your comments below, and just checking out our content. Again, just a quick reminder to everybody at home, if you do want to support Submission Radio, you can jump on, get your merchandise, and follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All our DMs are open, and we do our best to respond to you guys as quickly as we can. We appreciate you guys for all the support.
Yeah, for sure. Dennis hit the nail on the head with the support. The support from you guys means the world to us. So let's keep the love going. Keep the love going in the comment section below. We'll be sure to comment back. Enjoy this weekend's fights, and we'll see you guys next week.